All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of Lens. Thank you for being here. Today's guest speaker is Jon Fratti. He is an industrial designer and a graduate from the Rochester Institute of Technology, also known as RIT, where he started as a marketing major and stumbled into the world of industrial design. I think that's a very familiar story that we all kind of have gone through. Jon had a few impactful internships at Herman Miller and Canary, which led him working at a small studio called BZDesign. After leaving Rochester, Jon came to New York City to work for Quip, where he has been building products, packaging, and experiences for the past 3 years. This Lens Sessions discussion is about how involved with all aspects of development you can be at a startup, sharing some stories, photos from a few China trips, walkthroughs of process developments for a few of his designs. Everyone, please help me welcome our guest, Jon Fratti. Thank you so much, Jon, for joining us and for being here. And right now would be a good time for you to tune in. There he is.
There I am. Sorry about that. A little slow over here.
It's all good. Thank you so much for being here, and we're excited to have you share with us your journey.
Cool. Well, I'm equally excited to share, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I will cast right now.
So for those who are tuning in, I highly encourage you to send your questions in the Q&A, and we will integrate them in the conversation part of this Lens session. So, Jon, I'll let you take it from here.
Cool. All right, I'll run through it. There's going to be a lot of slides, but we're going to rapid fire through them. So I'm originally from Oakland, California. You know, geographically, it might look like the Brooklyn of San Francisco, but it couldn't be more different. You know, really a beautiful melting pot of cultures and backgrounds and, you know, the things that people do that build the culture of this city. You know, more specifically, I grew up in the upstairs of this bar. This is my dad's bar in downtown Oakland, you know, which really did the three things written on the door or on the wall, you know, art, music, and bar. There's a rotating door of, you know, artists coming in for shows or, you know, bands playing sets while I did my math homework upstairs. So although I didn't have a, you know, creative upbringing of drawing or, you know, taking things apart or tinkering, I was exposed to a pretty broad range of, you know, people doing things, doing pretty interesting things. The sign here is my dad's contribution to the world of design. While, you know, I think a pretty cool sign does commit the graphic design atrocity of stacking type, but, you know, it's an icon now, so I guess it worked out. You know, growing up, I had this obsession with New York, you know, partially because my dad's from there and, you know, probably because I watched too many rom-coms and, you know, taking place in New York. But, you know, it seemed like from the outside looking in, it had all the things I loved about Oakland of, you know, people from all walks of life doing, you know, every job you could imagine and just how inspirational that is, you know, kind of regardless of the work that you do. So when it was time to fly out, I, you know, kind of missed the mark by about 7-hour drive and landed in Rochester, New York at RIT, where I studied marketing initially, again, probably because of the, you know, all the Mad Men I was watching, wanted to do advertising or something. This is what Rochester usually looks like, not too sunny and, you know, typically below zero. A bit of a wake-up call for a California boy like me. So during my first week at school, we were put in these orientation groups, and I, you know, met a fellow student who was just starting out, and I asked what he was doing. He said industrial design. I had no idea what that was, like, you know, many people that have the same story. So he took me up to the studio, and I just lost it, knew that I had to get into the program and, you know, would do everything I needed to get in. So, you know, I spent the duration of my entire first year at college taking as many art classes and weaseling my way into whatever woodworking class I could get into to build a portfolio to get into this program. You know, and then after finally getting in, started doing, you know, pretty okay work, I thought, until one day I stumbled upon Behance, probably from listening to some talk about, how you need to check out Behance. And what I did was I filtered by school, and I started looking at, the work that, was coming out of other, universities like Cincinnati or Art Center in Pasadena. And, I, pretty much fully got kicked on my ass in terms of, where I was and, where I saw that I needed to get. But I look at this as a very pivotal moment in my schooling in terms of, kind of seeing where I need to get and lighting that fire that, for better or for worse, kept me in the studio until 4 a.m. every other night. But I do think I'm better for it. So after, kicking my ass for the first 2 years of school and probably sending out 100 or so job applications, I finally got, word back from Herman Miller, their medical team in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. So I flew out for the summer, and, here I kind of learned what a traditional office, like very traditional corporate office feels like, with the styrofoam cup, coffee break room situation. And kind of work that was, interesting, but maybe not the most creatively, liberating. This is a collection they did called the Palisade for waiting rooms. So the duration of my time at Herman Miller was essentially recreating every piece in this collection, which is something like 200 CAD models. So we could work with the model shop to prototype these and start testing them, because I think the CAD we got from this was done in SketchUp or something. So one step above a sticky note. I took what I learned there, went back to school, refined my portfolio. And when it was time to, apply for internships again, I, ended up going to this company called Canary. It was a tech company, a tech startup in New York City. And this is probably the most impactful thing that I experienced during college, was working for a company like this. This photo doesn't really do it justice, but, not only did I see what a design forward company, small company, agile, kind of how that runs from the inside, but also, what an office culture could feel like and how, just universally different it felt from the Herman Miller office. Beer on tap in the kitchen, being kind of a normal thing, fun happy hours with coworkers, and, just a generally casual feel where, you feel like you're working with friends. Rather than, I guess, a stodgy atmosphere. So this is something that I really craved when it came to, looking for future jobs. Everyone always talks about the importance of mentorship, and it couldn't be more true. Probably the most impactful thing about working at Canary was working for the director of design there, James Krause, who has certainly been a force in my, short-lived design career so far. And what I've learned from him not only has improved my hard skills, but it's also pushed me so much further than I would have pushed on my own. And thankfully after the internship, partially just because of how kind James is, continued talking, and he would always be willing to review my work later. Or if I got stuck on a problem, he'd chime in to help. So after all that, went to go be a contract designer at BZDesign, which is a small agency up in upstate New York. We did work with a little tiny startups up there, and then some strange, kind of behind the scenes B2B companies like industrial lifters or medical devices for physical therapy. But I cherry picked this one just because it's kind of a fun project. This is the Kodak Next Press, printing press. Launched a few years ago, but this is what it was. A big old mass of metal and plastic, probably about 40 feet long. I mean, to give you a sense of scale, this is one of the ink cartridges in this thing, and it's designed to crank out 20,000, 30,000 prints a day. And we were charged to reinvent this thing from an aesthetic standpoint, and kind of finding where we could to bring some functional improvements. One thing we noticed when we were talking to operators is how they like to run the printing press with this door wide open, which is pretty bad for the machine, but it allows them to see the paper travel through it, so they can see if there's a clog or kind of address an issue as it happens. So we started doing these Photoshop sketches where we would draw on top of the printing press. This was around the time that Fuse Project had launched their Super 8 camera, and Kodak was starting to reinvent it, or I guess reinvigorate its design language and branding back to the classic branding they had, this bold use of their yellow and the old logo. We thought, how do we bring that into how do we bring that into this I guess aspect of their product offering? This Photoshop sketching was super helpful, very agile, being able to use it as an underlay, and then just thinking about sheet metal panels as we form them. As we took it forward, we can kind of see how it materialized, and if you're familiar with that Super 8 camera, how some of that formal design language that Fuse Project established, how that kind of trickled into this. And then that door being open, kind of one of the key elements. You can see that glossy panel, that's where the door is. We found a way to convince them to make it out of glass so that they could keep it closed, and it becomes kind of this showcase element as as the machine's running, you see paper shuttling through it, and kind of a no-brainer solution. But honestly, it was harder to talk them into doing a 4-foot wide yellow panel than it was to do a glass panel. So after about 2 years at BZDesign, I picked up shop and decided it was time to get out of Rochester, partially because at BZDesign, while the work was interesting, there was no mentorship. I was working with really inspiring people, but I wasn't learning it from someone who'd navigated this terrain before me, which I really craved. Funnily enough, at Quip, that really wasn't the case. One thing that really stood out to me about Quip, and I think it's maybe like a point about taking risk, or maybe the benefits of potentially taking a risk, is when I was interviewing with Quip, we got down to getting ready for me to come out. Simon mentioned this to me on the phone, is that Quip will either not be here in a few months, or we get the fundraising and the whole company takes off, and kind of get ready for the ride that might be. This was before Quip had really raised any money formally, and they were at the tail end of their fundraising. This is Bill and Simon, the founders. This is probably one of the only photos they have together, but they're both industrial designers, and that was one thing that gave me a lot of hope about what working for Quip could be. Having industrial design, or design thinking at the forefront of the company, knowing that that's a valued aspect of the business, and kind of seeing how that leadership could potentially trickle into the company expanding and becoming more mature. I mean, to really give a sense of how small Quip was when I joined, I was employee 23. Shortly after I joined, we raised the first, Series A fundraising round, which then, over the course of the next 3 years, propelled the company to 180 plus employees. Over that time, I've put together a studio. This is Quip's original office that's now next door, and we have a history of kind of breaking down the wall of the old office into the new and extending it. So we were able to reclaim this original office as a design studio, definitely a rarity in New York. On the topic of breaking down walls, over the time that we've expanded to the 180 employees, we've knocked down 3 walls. So if you see in the background, the far back of this picture, that wall is no longer there, and it stretches twice the length of here. So we can see how this office just continues to grow as the company grows. And as the office grows, the team grows. So, the mentorship that I was lacking in the beginning at Quip, in being the only, designer on the hardware team, being the only person, making things on the hardware team for a long time, before we brought in engineers and we brought in, additional designers. So this is kind of where I'll talk a little bit about the benefits of seeing it through, like how you can kind of start to see how when you work at a small company that's design driven, what that can kind of activate for you as a designer, and I guess the things that you might have access to that might get delegated elsewhere. So this is the first project I ran through at Quip, which was, Quip is now going into Target. This was about two years ago. So Quip's going into Target. We need retail packaging. We've been a D2C brand since the beginning. We don't have this. We don't have a packaging brand language. We don't have a formal language for our packaging. we don't even have a material library beyond what we ship people direct to consumer, and we want to get away from that. We want to, have more paper. So that sparked this, idea of, kind of creating a new, creating language. And I think what's exciting about working for a small startup like this is you have the opportunity to build things from the ground up, things that, might already exist at other companies, like a design language or, a material library. Like you're very much, as a designer, building that and kind of establishing, the future moves that the company will make based on the moves you're making in the present. So this packaging was, 95% by weight was paper. Had an internal tray of molded fiber that, kind of combined the hang tag into the tray that held the product, also providing an easy way to pop the cap open. And then every element was made to be as recyclable as possible. This packaging, for whether it was the packaging or not, or maybe it's just the brand, whatever it is, definitely illustrates the impact that, packaging like this can have on the shelf, especially when you look at other, products in the same space, whether or not, our product, jumps out on its own more, our packaging certainly did. This is, I guess, one example of how we might tune, something like this, just because we are, seeing it from start to finish. This is us looking at, how much force is required to remove the caps from the paper tube that holds the product. So, how do we make an experience that not only, looks great, stands out on shelf, but, when it's time to take it home and pop it open, you're not fighting with it. And that same kind of premium experience that you see on the shelf is carried through in how you, unbox the product. Taking that even further and imagining, like how the product sits in Target. So now as a designer, I've designed the product, but now I get to start thinking about, how customers are going to see Quip at Target for the first time. So this was this early 3D sketch I did of a end cap or a point of purchase, for Quip, imagining like how do we recreate maybe a bathroom scene, in the middle of Target, to kind of evoke those same feelings that we try and evoke with the product and our messaging. How can we kind of create a silo of that here? And then you can kind of see how that starts to develop, like the general concept of thinking about bringing in some greenery or bringing in graphic set pieces, right aligning all the product, and then having kind of our informational component on the left. And this is now working in collaboration with the the graphic design team at Quip, to help build these assets and building these 3D assets. And then we take it all the way to the end. We see my friend Neil in LA stealing one of the slippers from the setup that we had at that shop, which is, whatever, it's fine, he's a friend, but it's also just a problem with end caps with 3D elements. But this is a good example of, you see something from start to finish of we need packaging. Okay, now we have packaging. Now we need a way to merchandise it and, display ourselves in Target. How am I as a designer going to think about, relating all these elements together and, building something that feels cohesive in the end. And, thinking about packaging a little bit further, and as our packaging has evolved, it's required a need to, not only the packaging on the brush, but think about packaging for accessory products we've developed, and how do we build a system? So again, there's no packaging system that exists. How do we create it? So rallied around this, form, and how do we standardize it to where we can create divisions of this primary form that holds the brush, and then we have a subdivision that's half the height that can hold most accessory products that, that we release. So we have this standardized, packaging system in all of our retail environments. This is just, kind of like thinking about details and kind of getting into the weeds of it. A lot of, the design that we see, is the pretty renderings or the sketches. But in reality, this takes up a lot of time, and this would be, like a DFM process, a design for manufacturing. So on the left, you'll see the, the concept 3D model that I would send to our packaging factory. And then they send back, okay, here's us thinking about, how we can adapt it, make it more engineerable, make it easier, or more producible, make it easier on our molds, you know, reduce the scrap rate for these molds coming off. So how do we you know, design that tray to where it's not breaking as we rip it off the tool? And then, you know, there's a back and forth. So this takes a lot of time, and then you eventually end up pretty close to what you wanted with the original design, as long as you're diligent and shepherding it all the way through, and not necessarily kind of throwing it over the fence to whatever partner you're working with and expecting them to, you know, deliver on the same vision that you laid out. Now this process can get a little boring, or maybe not boring, but it's just not creatively stimulating. This is why I turn to, you know, platforms like Instagram to be able to, you know, develop just things for fun. You know, whatever I'm inspired to make on that day, whether it be like a piece of furniture or lighting, but just to keep the creative juices flowing while I'm in a phase of a project that, you know, I'm not necessarily making anything. I'm just editing and rebuilding and communicating, which is very important. You know, and Instagram's become this insane community for industrial designers, to where, you know, it's never short on inspiration when you open it. Continuing along, this is refillable floss. I'll kind of flip through this one quickly, but just some interesting kind of pillars within it. This is the first piece of hardware that I formally designed at Quip that launched. It's a, you know, refillable floss dispenser. You know, both, you know, thinking about a brand language of how it fits into our you know, into our brand, but also how do we make usability improvements over your traditional string floss without reinventing it? And, you know, that kind of came down to, you know, how do we make it opening floss a delightful experience, rather than fiddling with a little living hinge thing, or, you know, how do we make grabbing floss just that much easier? And, you know, that's by stretching it unsupported, so you can just grab it instead of having to pinch, you know, along the top of a little plastic case. One thing that I think I like most about this project, and how it kind of carries forward and started to inform a lot of the hardware that we've made since, is this idea of functional ambiguity. You know, there's a lot of designers that, you know, kind of rally behind this mindset. One that comes to mind is Kareem Rashid. If you look at his cone Dirt Devil, and it's just a pyramid that you are meant to leave out. But what's really interesting about, you know, how that mindset applies to oral care is when you take these elements that you really need to use daily for a medical perspective, and you turn it into something that you want to leave out and you're reminded daily to use because you see it, it becomes, you know, a functional win, on top of it being, you know, this thing that has maybe beautified someone's, you know, bathroom just that much. You know, again, being fully immersed, you know, with the product and working, you know, sitting right next to the engineers developing it, and, you know, seeing every email that's going to the factory, you're able to control all of these details from concept to production. So, you know, any radius that I've spec'd, or if we look at this middle image here, we can kind of see how that gray surface is pillowed out. You know, things like that might get lost when it's rebuilt by maybe a manufacturer, or maybe by an engineer that you're not communicating with. You know, that's able to be preserved all the way through. And that's equal parts activated by the fact that Quip is a, you know, design-driven company, and they value design and they're willing to spend the extra time and money on it. But it also, you know, comes from, you know, due diligence and communication, and, you know, again, shepherding these products, you know, from the concept render all the way to production. This is just kind of a cool moment. Again, like, speaks to the growth of, you know, Quip. You know, when I first joined, we'd celebrate if we got an ad on the subway. This is about, you know, 2 years into that journey, and, you know, probably 150 employees later, you know, seeing ads for the company up in Times Square for the product that we had just launched was both a, you know, it's a cool moment of validation, but also kind of seeing, you know, if we talk about growth and we see how a company kind of evolves, we can kind of see that snowball effect, or the, you know, the snowball rolling downhill and picking up steam. The kids brush is just a fun little one, and I think it speaks to the importance of being willing to be wrong, and kind of checking your initial biases and thoughts. So the point of that with this is that with kids brushes, if you look at them, the handles are, very thick. They're all bubbly. They're, very kid-like. They're very different from the adult brushes. And when we first, introduced the idea of, starting a kid's brush, that was where Simon and Bill, the leadership, wanted to take the product, was that, we need a shorter handle, we need a thicker handle, and we need to maybe think about making it more playful. And so I asked the question, what happens if we just adjust the brush head and we, think about the material and color to make it more kid-like? And, what happens when we send that to kids? So that's what we did. So I chopped down some brush heads and welded them together by melting the plastic and sanding it, because we didn't want kids brushing with a brush held together by glue. So we had to do it all glueless. But we started getting these insights back. They were really, equal parts fun, but also, kind of through the idea of, or through those preconceived notions on their head of, the kids really resonating with the fact that their brush looked like their parents, or feeling kind of more grown up because it didn't look like a kid's brush, while still accommodating functionally for what a kid needs, with a smaller brush head and, a grippier handle. And the other really beautiful part of this story is, everything is, from an architecture perspective, is the same. So as a kid gets older and they've, treated their quip well, they're able to change their subscription and, put an adult brush head on their handle. So you have the beginnings of a story of, growing up with the brush, and, maybe limiting the amount of things that you need to buy and throw away, just by allowing that product to accommodate a wide range of ages. Part of the kid's brush is color, and we wanted to, kind of bring some fun into the kid's brush as we think about, this is our smart brush that launched recently. So we needed a hero color that really stood out. And we were looking at all these trend reports for colors, and nothing really felt fun or quippy or, within our, language of what we wanted. So I put together this board that looked, I think, exactly like this, of, thinking about the nostalgia of yellow raincoats and, what that maybe means to kids, or certainly what it meant to me, and what it maybe means to parents, buying these for their kids. And so, that translates to, the brush doing a full monochrome, color matching, which I'll talk a little bit about later, being one of the most fun things that you can do as a designer. But we definitely, I think the yellow ended up suiting the form really beautifully. And, we definitely see a lot of adults requesting this as an adult handle. This is just a quick one, but the solar charger, again, like that idea of functional ambiguity. How do we translate this charger that, how do you charge your quip every 3 months? How do we translate that into something that maybe lives more seamlessly in your home? It doesn't look like a charger. Maybe it just becomes a little accent somewhere on your windowsill. And using a solar panel on the front, we can kind of passively charge a AAA. So when you get your new brush head in the mail, you've got a fully charged battery, we're just waiting for you, and you no longer need to be using AAAs. But you're also not thinking about cables and, remembering to charge it. It's just part of your routine as you refresh your brush. So then the mentor returns. As Quip has grown to this point, the team's built out. We've got an awesome engineering team. We've got, I've got a junior designer working for me, and we've got, all the teams have, greatly scaled up. But what we don't have is as a director of industrial design at Quip. And, for me, that's kind of, at the time, that was kind of me stumbling through it, getting approval from Simon and Bill. But what I wasn't getting was, again, that mentorship that I, got from James that, that I grew a lot from, and I was really craving that. And so when I saw we were getting ready to gear up for hiring a director, I reached out to James and just wanted to check if he was at all interested. Thankfully, he was. He certainly missed the startup atmosphere and decided to come in for an interview, and it went over perfectly. And since then, he's brought so much structure to the team. The education that I was missing, as a young designer within a team like this, in terms of how to have a rock solid design process, or how to kind of navigate within within this realm of a startup as it becomes more developed, and how you can't really just be a cowboy and throw concepts around. Like you have to be a little more tactful as things become a little more real. So it was amazing having him back on the team. And right as he joined, we were working through this project. And I'm going to deep dive a little bit more into this one because I think there's some fun process with it, and it really shows, like, as a designer, how deep you can go and how to kind of problem solve if things aren't going super well. The irony of this project is it's a travel bag, and the guy designing it, this is what his DOP kit or travel bag looked like before the project started. So like industrial designers, how do we become an expert in a very quick amount of time so we can kind of insert ourselves in the narrative of this product and help design maybe something that feels like an improvement. And a lot of that starts with talking to people and seeing how they live and how they interact with these products. So we at this point, we're fortunate to have a pretty big team at Quip, and we had them all pack out their travel bag and bring it into the office so we could get the dimensions, weigh them, talk to them about how they use it and how they live with it, what they do with it when they get to where they're going, and feed all these insights into the concepts we were developing, to really build something that feels like, both at home in the Quip library, but also, within, with our same principles that we lay out, is a kind of a functional leap, or it has a benefit. As we develop it, this is kind of like what you would get from a partner doing textiles, is these sample sheets for materials. So on the left, we can start to see some zipper samples, and on the right, we can start to see some batting, or some webbing. So here we're kind of thinking about hand feel, not so much about color, because we know we can dye these whatever color we need to. But this is kind of as you work through the conceptual process and starting to think about ordering material to sample these, this is kind of what the process might look like. After working through a bunch of concepts for it, we started rallying around this idea of thinking about a travel bag or a DOP kit, like similarly to a suitcase with a mesh on both sides, and kind of like allowing that freedom to pack it out how you want, but still providing visibility for the products inside. And then maybe having some elastic loops to, to hold the product, to kind of showcase your Quip products, or, kind of elevate them within the, the mess that is the packed out travel bag. We also started really liking this idea of using silicone, because we found whenever you're interviewing people that, their DOP kit lived in the bathroom when they got to where they were going, and often lived on the sink. So it felt like a no-brainer to start looking towards a material that was not only antimicrobial, but also waterproof, to protect what's inside, and kind of waterproof from the inside out as well. And that if you're traveling somewhere and something explodes, it's not going to leak all over the rest of your stuff, because it's not leaking through fabric. So it felt like some big wins that we could accommodate for. But it's not always the case where it's, everything goes smoothly. So I packed up and flew out to China, to the factory that was producing this, and they handed me this puddle, which was a mess of, badly sized patterns and a silicone that was both too thin and too soft to, have the structure that we needed. So, kind of thus begins panic mode of, how might we problem solve this on the fly, while we're effectively building it, to sample. And that started with addressing kind of the two areas, or how do we kind of break the problem down to isolate it. So I first started by heading to the factory producing the silicone shells for this bag. And, I knew that there were a few levers I could pull to address the kind of like wateriness or floppiness of that silicone. And, the first one is the easier one, which is adjusting the durometer, or the stiffness of the silicone that's being molded. So we end up with something a little bit stiffer. And then the other benefit of working with a prototype tool here is that we can take the cavity, which is the, I guess, the positive side here, or the core rather. We can take the core and inset it so we can increase the wall thickness of this molded part. So, and that ends up being a quick change, because all they have to do is just machine half the mold down. And we're able to very quickly, validate, like, is this increase in wall thickness and this increase in durometer going to get us the structure for this bag, that we intended when we were thinking about it, purely in a 3D space. again, this takes like some pushing. People don't always want to, work as fast as they need to, but when you're on a short timeline, because you only have so many days in China, if you can stress the importance of it getting done, they'll often be accommodating. So this went from a change that they needed 2 weeks to do to them getting it done in 4 days before I left. So before I left, I was able to validate these thicker samples. The other part, that really wasn't working in the bag was the materials that we had outlined before, in that, none of us had the most experience with, building a soft good and seeing, these materials in isolation. So seeing the mesh in the bag separate from the webbing and separate from the elastics, seeing those all in isolation, they felt good independently, but when they come together, they felt, it didn't feel right. So how do we address that? We drove to the this material market in China, where each of these stores has a different specialty, and it's essentially kind of the front of house for a factory that produces that, that material. So you'll go into a store and all they sell is webbing. You can cut a sample of this and take it, and then they'll, or they'll send some rolls to the factory that you're working with so you can start sampling with it. Or you go to a zipper manufacturer and they just have mountains of zippers. And after sifting through this pile for about an hour and just not finding, what felt right for the product, it then turned to, okay, what can we do to, make this custom? So I just asked the question, can we do a custom zipper? Is that something that we have time for? Working with our partner that was managing the relationship with the factory, and turned out they had a zipper manufacturer they could, spin up. And before I left, I was able to see, some zipper concepts. So I ran home after our visit to the material market and modeled these up on my hotel desk and sent them out that night. And before I left, we were able to see some zipper models. So again, like speaking to a small company, a small design-driven company's willingness to maybe spend a little extra money or, take the risk of doing something custom, purely because they want to have a fully realized product. They don't want to have anything that feels compromised on the product. And so as all this is happening, we're shipping in the better materials to the factory. We're sewing up new models. We're sewing new prototypes. And we're still trying to push this, fully perimeter, or this full perimeter zip away thing that just obviously was not working. I mean, you can really see it not working on the right image. But this prompted, again, like, now that we have the materials, now that we have the silicone shells feeling we want them to, how do we maybe rethink how these fabric pieces come together to give something or to create something that's more up to our standards? So that came to working in the sample shop, with the people sewing upstairs, to take those panels and, kind of sketch out how we want, those panels to sit. So on the left image, we see, we're no longer zipping all the way around the edge. We're just doing a single zip to create a pocket. And that allows the mesh to be tight as it's sewn in, rather than having to be loose to allow for that zipper to go all the way around. And then on the right, we had this one where it's like, what if we just get rid of zippers altogether and just have open pockets? But one learning from this was this idea of doing offset openings. So having the zipper not go down the middle, but happen as close to the edge as possible. And we'll see that as we start to think about how the hook that I had shown on this page, how that hook comes into play and how this bag might hang. We think about how those asymmetric openings might be like a functional benefit. So as we move along, things continue to improve. We get through more models, and we, start to get happy with how these materials are looking together, and how the bag is, being sewn. So then we run what's called a PV build, or a product verification build, where we do a mini production build where we, make 50 units or something like that, to see how a bag like this might transition into mass production, from this sampling stage. And it's, from this batch of products that we're able to outline, what our highs and lows are, right? So what's the best we can imagine this thing to look like, and what's the worst that we're willing to accept, that feels up to our standards, and quip being quip, that spectrum's pretty narrow. And then from that batch, you would identify a golden sample, which is what the GS stands for here. So that sample then lives on the factory floor as a way for them to compare against and check quality and make sure that everything they're producing is kind of up to the specifications that we established at the beginning of the project. So after returning back to the office with a functional bag in hand, after sending a few scary emails during my time there, talking about how difficult this might be, a new request popped up, which was color. The bag was always intended to be black because we only had so much time to produce it, and it was meant to be kind of a smaller batch thing. But as we got more excited about it, we wanted it to be more of a main staple in the quip arsenal. So we wanted to have something that matched our offerings for the brush, and that we core pillar of what we do is choice of customization and choice of color that matches your style. So I flew back out and started to see some some samples. This is a great tip that I picked up when looking at these samples, is whenever you're doing anything with color and if you don't have a light box nearby, is to take them outside, and you'll be pretty shocked at how transformative the light might be. The light in the factories is often very harsh and very blue. So what looked like a pretty nice coppery pink indoors when I took it outside was a chicken breast, or as James lovingly referred to as a fake Halloween butt. So sometimes you just have to get more views on it, or more see it in different contexts, and to really get a full idea of what color is, because color is something that's so dramatically affected by light. You'll notice those lines on the shell in the previous picture, and we kind of see them here, is as we moved from the aluminum prototype tool to a steel mass production tool, we were noticing some flow issues with the silicone as it moved through the mold. So we use these pens to highlight and circle areas that have either flow marks as the material is flowing unevenly and curing unevenly, therefore causing color aberrations, or areas where the material may be folded over itself while it was curing to create creases. Much akin to how you would review a product for sink marks as you're evaluating the first parts off of the tool for another product. So we started highlighting that here and working with the factory to address that and kind of fine tune the mold as I was in China for this. Pink is a huge pain for this project. It was there's so many different ways a pink can go, and we had a pretty particular idea in mind. And you can kind of see on the left here the Pantone chips that we were using as our kind of like color standard for how we wanted to mold these materials. So one quick way of getting around that was, instead of waiting around for samples of full shells to arrive, I decided to spend a day at the silicone factory to then just rip through as many of these test chips as we could, which had a much shorter production time than molding a full shell and having it shipped to us. It was about a 3-hour drive to this factory and about a full day there. But I left with a chip in hand for each color that represented exactly what we wanted it to be. So that took a lot of the guesswork out of it. You can really see how far off the green is in the background, how translucent, or how vibrant and neon it is. And you can really start to see that spectrum come alive from full chicken breast to like a really hot pink to something that has more of like a sunburnt or like a coppery tone in it, which is where we ended up deciding to take that part. Side note, if you have an iPhone and you're trying to take a picture of anything in color, if you compare two things as you take a picture of it, really pay attention to how much the iPhone is color correcting, color correcting those, those parts. If you look on the right, the far right here, those two look pretty similar, but they couldn't look more different in person. It likes to normalize color. So I talked a little bit earlier about how color matching is kind of a pain, or a little difficult. It's not an impossible task, but it's a task that takes time, which was the one resource that we really didn't have on this project. So a lot of it came down to hoping we got it right as fast as we could and pushing our suppliers to develop samples. So what we see here is a zipper that we would use on the product, and garment dyeing that to match the Pantone spec that we had laid out for the shell. And when you have zippers and meshes and webbings coming from all different factories, and they all have a different idea of what an accurate match to that color is, you start getting these pretty interesting colors, like this one, where we had a silicone shell coming from one factory, and then we had another factory trying to match the pink, and that's where they ended up. And then we had the zipper, the custom zipper with the electroplating, and that's where they ended up. And it was pretty close, but some of it was close. And again, you can kind of see how, how different companies kind of different ideas of, of color. So these are some electroplated custom zippers that, they were, trying to hit a certain Pantone. And the green below is reminiscent of the first samples of the green shells we got before I went in and edited the color and, tried to push them towards making it more minty. One way around this is if you have parts that are produced in the same way by a supplier, is just, ensuring that they're doing everything in the same batch. So instead of the zippers being, done in a batch and the S hooks being done in a batch, if they all need to match, then they're all electroplated together. So there's a certain, I guess, connectivity across the colors, even though they're separate parts. And again, like we did with the PV build, the product verification build, and signing off on those golden samples as we developed these colors and got samples in from the different factories. So each material on the left here represents a different factory. Once we got to a point that we were happy, we would sign the material, and that became our golden standard for our color target for that material. And we can kind of see how those colors kind of come to life on the green bag here. And I think one principle with golden with color matching, especially in soft goods, just because light hits fabric in such a different way, is that you have a certain amount of leeway when it comes to color matching, in that things don't have to be perfectly tonally the same, but if they're complementary of each other, you can end up with something that feels harmonious while you're still dealing with a few different shades of green. Obviously or thankfully, and I obviously because this photo exists, but thankfully it came together and the product launched on time. We were able to have the product in the colors that we wanted, with the material that felt good, still preserving the stretch of the silicone that gave a person packing it out a certain flexibility to pack it out. And ultimately a product we were happy with. And here we can kind of see it coming together, with the loops and how we kind of, amplify the quip products within it, but then we provide kind of like open storage, kind of harkening back to the original concept of emulating what a suitcase does, where it gives, a user total freedom to pack out, what they need to pack, but still have visibility of what's inside. And then here we can kind of see how that S hook comes into play. This felt like a pretty unique thing to this bag of, by setting those zippers up from the middle, and then you hang it. When you open them, they just become hanging pockets, and the product inside can't fall out because your mesh is now acting as a retainer for the product inside. Now, I think that is the whole deck. I know I talked a lot, but the best is yet to come. There's some exciting things on the horizon for Quip that emulate all these same principles that exist on these products. Creating permanent solutions for products that are typically looked at as disposable, and what kind of experiences we might be able to activate by bringing those sensibilities into that product category. So very excited about what's to come for the rest of this year, and I think that is my piece on this.
Fantastic, John. Thank you so much for sharing so much information. We really appreciate it. Let me kind of, if you can just log off of the screen share, we can just go back to the speaker view.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Great.
Yeah, let me stop sharing. And we're good, right?
Yeah, we should be good. Fantastic. Yeah, so in your presentation, you talked a lot about mentorship and the importance of having a mentor. And I want to ask you a couple of questions about that. You went through RIT's ID program, and then you got a couple of internships. Do you feel that mentorship plays a very important role in filling the gaps that sometimes school might not, missing as far as the education that you get from, school. And do you think that a mentor kind of helps with filling those gaps? Because you definitely went into, startup, and there's a lot of things that I'm sure you picked up along the way, working at a startup, but also like dealing with manufacturing and retail design and all of that. And I am sure that a lot of that wasn't taught at school. And if it was, I don't know how in depth was it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how mentorship kind of helped you kind of grow and learn a lot, maybe a lot of things that you didn't pick up from school.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think there's kind of like two parts to that. Thinking about mentorship purely in the world or the bubble of school. If you're able to find one, it's great. It's not the easiest thing, and it's not always guaranteed. I think, before I had a mentor, the most impactful thing to me in school was both, surrounding myself with people that really inspired me.
Mm.
I think that was, probably the most impactful thing that happened to me during school. Is I got very lucky to, make some good friends that were, as motivated as I was, to do well in the field and to push each other. And, we get into this phase of, always trying to one up each other, a little competitive, but, friendly competitive development. I think that was possibly the most effective thing, and certainly the most enjoyable. And then when it comes to mentorship, I think there's certain things that, I can definitely reach out. I definitely was able to reach out to James to, get certain questions when it came to formal sensibilities. But then there's just like a certain amount that you have to do on your own. I can definitely speak to the retail design for Quip. It was certainly something I had never done before. But if we apply those same principles that we learn in design school, and we learn from developing product, and we think about a retail display in that way, some of the puzzle pieces start falling into place, and then some things you learn the hard way, by doing it the first time. There's a lot of process at Quip before, things weren't fully solidified or fully formalized. It was a lot of flying by the seat of your pants design, where you're moving quickly and you're breaking things, and if you're lucky, you're lucky. Which is a lot of fun, but it doesn't always work.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. And I know that, mentorship, I mean, it's difficult to find one person that really, like you said, I feel like it's definitely a dating game. You got to have a lot of things in common with that person. And then that person obviously has to, have the time and investment into that student. And it's not something that you can just shoot someone a message and say, hey, can you be my mentor? It's a little more complex. It has to be very
Yeah.
organic. And I think now with COVID, that's a little hard because there's a little less human interaction happening. But it is very important. And I think it's something that we need to amplify more in our community.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the biggest parts of it is just to be yourself. I think people have a pretty good sense of being able to detect bullshit or when people are putting, something on. So it's just better to be yourself. And if you don't gel with the person, you don't. And you don't have to pretend to be a different person just to get a mentor. Especially if you find yourself in like a metropolitan or densely populated area, or an area with a large design community. The likelihood of that happening is just that much greater as long as you inject yourself into the community by, going to certain events.
Absolutely. And yeah, I like to kind of shift things over to, your work that you did at Quip and the work that you're doing there now. It is a startup and it's a pretty big company from, its inception. It would be awesome for you to quickly talk about, well, one, it sounds really exciting to be a part of a startup, but number two, what are some of the pressures that you face as an industrial designer? Um, like deadlines, but also like maybe the financial aspects of that, because I feel like when we think of a startup, you think about, oh, it's usually strapped for cash or things are really tight. It's not a big corporation like your Microsoft or your Amazons where there's a lot of R&D budgets. How's that how does that work for you as an industrial designer?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely speak to when I first took the job at Quip, pre-Series A. There was no money, and I was paid nearly nothing, and I moved into the cheapest apartment I could find, as far into Brooklyn as you can go, and I was okay with that. I was willing to make that risk, because I believed in what it could be, and I believed in I guess the leadership, and I'm imagining what a design-driven company like that, what kind of experience that could be. So I was willing to take that risk. I don't know if I'd be as willing to take that risk if I was later in my career, or if I had other responsibilities, but being being as young as I am, and especially as young as I was then, with very little financial baggage, it felt like a very appropriate time to take that risk. I can say that the landscape of startups has changed pretty dramatically since certain events. Like if you look at what happened with WeWork, and the huge falling out with their investors, this era of startups that survive on burning millions of dollars of cash to put their marketing everywhere. That's kind of like how Harry's and Casper and all those big companies got big. That era is kind of gone now, because investors want to see companies that are a bit more profitable, or a bit more focused in how they get where they're going, rather than just pouring more money into it. I know there's another part to that. I think do you mind repeating? Do you feel like there's a part of the question I didn't answer?
Yeah, maybe well, first, I think talking a little bit about some of the risks and personal things that you went through. I think that's also important as a designer who might be looking to work for a startup. I think sometimes we forget that is one big aspect, a pretty big change of lifestyle, that some of these compromises that you got to take. But number two, like at work as an industrial designer, do you have to design with a very tight budget? And sometimes when you think of designing, you kind of want to. Sometimes you got a little blue sky, and you got to bring it back, and things have to be tighter, and things have to be pretty, small and consistent, so you can meet these budgets.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. And I think it kind of relates to the point of being inspired by the fact that the leadership was both industrial designers. That they see the value of industrial design, and they're the ones kind of guiding the ship. So we're able to apply that to our development. So I think we've been very fortunate, or I've been very fortunate developing products, and everyone else on the team, that it's pretty low compromise at Quip, in terms of we want to get the product out in the most pure vision that we can. We don't want to we don't want to compromise a part to save a little bit of cost. We can worry about we have cost down efforts after the fact, but really, because we're trying to create these products that are kind of like fundamentally rethinking an experience that people have very ingrained in them. Like flossing, for example, is a very set way that you interact with that product. How is a company going to come in and kind of reinvent or kind of rethink that process with a product that's inherently compromised? So I've been very fortunate about that, and I think that was one of the things that really drew me to Quip, was being able to design not without barriers, but with an understanding from leadership that sometimes it's good to push those barriers, and kind of the benefits that come from doing that.
Absolutely. We have some very specific questions regarding the bags, because obviously that's a big part of what you shared, and probably really exciting that you kind of went in and talked about DFM and kind of the whole process. Here's a question from one of our audience members, Bitwell. He wants to know, how long did you have to make the changes to the bag when you were going through that process and you were getting these samples?
Yeah. So that was, the whole project was just an atrociously short amount of time. I mean, I think from start to finish on that project, we were at somewhere in the ballpark of 7 months, and that includes all the concepts, all the manufacturing. That's 7 months from starting the project to it's on the website. In regards to on-the-fly changing, that happened predominantly during my first trip, which is about 2 weeks. 2 weeks working Monday through Saturday, so just Sundays off. and then some parts of Sunday if we needed to take it. And that was a solo trip, so it was just me and our kind of like translating partner that we were working with to kind of facilitate the operations. And that just turned into, we need to go to the material market. That's an 8-hour day of searching for materials, and now we've locked that part down. If we need to start adjusting patterns, it's an 8-hour day of sitting in the 8 to 10 hour day of sitting in the sample room just sewing all day. And kind of getting where we're going, and then you get home and take photos and share it with the team back in the States. So yeah, I'd say about 11 days of just hard work is how much time I had.
Well, thanks for answering that. That sounds very long and very exhausting day, but I think you have to do what you have to do so that product succeeds. So
yeah. I think the only other point I'd add to that is I kind of mentioned like the whole flying by the seat of your pants design, and I think within the spectrum of the bag, if we think about the zippers or the custom hardware, that was born out of here's the zipper, we're not liking these, go home, 3D model them in a matter of an hour, and then within an hour and a half the factory is starting to make the tool for those zippers. So there isn't really time to like second guess decisions. There's, you kind of have to hope you got it right. But if you're able to take those risks and potentially be willing to pay for a second tool for the zipper, if the first one isn't cutting it, or reverting back to an off-the-shelf zipper and having just paid for the tool, there's ways around it, but there's also certain risks that a company has to be willing to take to do something that quickly.
Here's another question from Sing Yu, and he wants to know where the final zipper designs really the ones you did in your hotel room that night. Am I getting that question right, Sing Yu? Were the final zipper designs the ones you did in your hotel room that night?
Okay. Well, first off, hey, Sing Yu, been a while. And then secondly, let's see, the final zippers, there's the ring pull that exists as the exterior zipper on the bag. We wanted to do a ring pull so we could, give a user a lot of purchase to zip that bag open quickly, because, going around the full perimeter of a kind of a pill shape like that is something a little bit difficult with your traditional zipper. And then the other custom zipper on the right, which is kind of this more carved away pill shaped thing, that's the internal zippers that live on the mesh pockets. Mm-hmm. So the reason we wanted them to be custom, or the reason that I really felt like that was important, is that's the tactile point that when a user is interacting with the bag, they're feeling how that silicone feels. We really want to nail the texture and feel of that part. When they're trying to get in and out of a pocket, that's kind of the hard line connection between them and the product. So we really wanted that to feel special.
And here's a very interesting question. Will Quip move away from dental care eventually?
I think there is a lot of room in dental care right now. If we apply that logic of a permanent product that replaces something that kind of lives and dies by the fact that it's disposable, and what experience that might activate. If we were to apply that to other products that you kind of think of within the oral care space, I think some really interesting opportunities pop up. Certainly some products that really don't exist and have not existed up until a certain point. And we might see some of those expansions happening before the year ends. So
that's exciting. And I have one more question to ask you, and that question is, what advice do you have for students who are seeking to jump into industry? What is something from everything that you've learned? It looks like you worked in corporate, you worked in startups, you worked in consultancies and back at startups. What is one advice you would leave to students?
Sure. Light a fire under your ass. This is a hard industry. There are not, just to speak candidly about it, there are not a lot of jobs, and there are a lot of people that want those jobs. And both a problem with the industry, but also just a reality that we have to deal with as designers. And it's certainly something that I've, seen from hiring. When I put up a listing, I get, 200 applications to that listing. And it's just, you have to work hard. You have to be the person that's working harder than the person next to you, or the person that's, willing to, go an extra mile of, connecting with somebody, or, going out that night to go to an event to meet people. I think that's super impactful for me. That moment happened when I looked at Behance and I filtered by school, and I saw that, I was light years behind, other students. So it's really about like holding yourself to a standard, and working hard. I don't think any school is going to get you everything that you need from your classes. You always have to do some level of outside work. For every hour that you're putting in school, you have to put at least 2 hours in, outside of school to really get where you need to go. Thankfully there's so many resources out there now, and there's such a beautiful community on Instagram that I don't think that that's as hard as it maybe used to be, to hold yourself to that standard, to have the visibility of, how other people are performing, to know the hard skills, that you need to have. And then just to kind of build on that, to know that it's not all about hard skills. I think that like hard skills is super fun. I love doing a cool render. I love making a nice sketch. But the thing that really falls apart for me when I interview people is storytelling. Like you really got to nail storytelling. You got to I ultimately don't really care so much if a person can do a great render or do a great sketch. I care how their brain's working. I care how they're thinking about a problem. I want to know that they're thinking in general. I want to know like the thing that they deliver feels like a solution. And a lot of that comes from functional thinking. The rendering is just a nice way to do it. I think anyone can make a good render, but it takes a person thinking pretty hard to make a product that feels really good.
Absolutely, you got to do what you have to do to grow as much as you can, and that's some fantastic advice. Jon, thank you so much for being on Lens. Thank you for sharing so much content. That was amazing. We really appreciate it. And for those who are tuning in, I hope that you were able to get some amazing insights from Jon. And best of luck with everything. We look forward to what Quip has under their sleeve in the coming months and year. And thank you for being a part of this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I hope everyone maybe got at least one laugh out of it or learned something.
Fantastic. Take care, everyone. See you later, Jon.
See ya.